and welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. This episode, we are continuing our discussion on The Border Simulator by Gabriel Dozal. Today, we will be discussing the second half of the collection.
Cool. So, dear fellow crosser, I think we're gonna try to be more efficient this episode and not go through every single piece. With that said, here's my first part, which is in the.
Sorry, can I just say that this is episode number 90?
Is
it? Yeah.
So what does that mean?
That means we're 10 away from 100.
Oh, snap. We were talking about that before you got here, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah.
So we weren't too sure.
We're gonna plan something cool for our 100th episode.
Well,
A party? No, I'm just kidding.
we'll spin the wheel.
Giveaways or something. Oh yeah.
We'll spin the wheel and see who's the lucky 100th episode.
Put their names on there.
Yeah.
A live show would be kind of interesting, you know?
Who?
A live show?
A live show
Yeah, that would be cool.
in front of a studio audience or
Well,
something.
I've done that before a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we've had guest authors on, and then we could spin for prizes.
Maybe with Cassie.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry, I just wanted to say it.
combo breaker.
Yeah.
Plans ahead.
Yay!
About halfway through the book, querido compañero cruzante, dear fellow crosser. And I guess just to kind of start it, we're gonna talk a little bit about just similar things that we've seen throughout the collection and like overall themes that we've encountered, along with some specific poems that, stood out to us. But yeah, it's been an interesting time with this collection. I think Richie, you had the first.
Yeah. So, I just one of my favorite kind of like lines and play on words is on 96. You look at the crossers, you look just like them, and I like this the part, but it's hard not to know everyone in this narrow corridor where corridos tuba from every car. It's a lot that's quiet. I like the play of like corridor to corridos. I was like the use of tuba as a verb here. There's tuba from every car, and it's such a sonic description. Like if you've driven around, that boom, 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 boom. Like so. That was a pretty fun section there, and we did talk about a lot of musical allusions throughout, so there could be an opening to that. But yeah, that's one of the first ones that I thought of for this section. So you guys said you had something on 100, right?
Yeah. Towards the end of this poem, Dear Crosser, did you know that you're not your body? Just this idea that, like, about assimilation, and how people might feel like in order to be accepted into America, I guess, they have to kind of lose a lot of who they are and like their own cultures and kind of blend in to American culture, I guess. So the line that really stood out to me was towards the end, I heard someone giving advice at the kiosk about crossing. Better to assimilate as soon as possible. And yeah, so it was just a line that stood out to me from this poem.
But then you also have the assimilate, simulate kind of wordplay added to that. My crossing buddy told me no, it was simulate.
Yeah.
Which adds to the entire simulation of the book.
And then, of course, in the closing there's another wordplay with the border face I trusted to myself isn't trustworthy. Yeah. And I think these might be a little easy to miss if, like, you're kind of trying to breeze through. So I think one thing about this collection is it really does force you to, and this is, again, what makes it, so dense, is just having to reread it and see what he's trying to get at. how to interpret it in a different way because of that, of the puns and the allusions.
Yeah.
Which aren't, I mean, the first part of that in the Spanish version makes sense. Mejor asimilar lo más pronto posible, pero mi carnal del cruce me dijo, no, fue simular. La cara de frontera que me confié no es digna del óxido. So, like, that last part doesn't translate like it does in the English side. I trusted to myself isn't, the border face I trusted to myself isn't trustworthy. Right? So, yeah, so again, like the translation, like I think some things are missed a little bit in terms of like the wordplay only. Like
Yeah.
the meaning's still there, but we do miss the puns and the wordplay.
I think someone said they had 104. I think it was you, Reina, who said right.
Yeah, I think so.
Possibly.
Is the Konami code, is that the one?
Yeah, was it?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, just I think we were talking about this pre. I almost said pre-game, pre-show.
Where's your head at?
I know pre-show. About just like his allusions to our current. I don't know. There's some contemporary, like mention of TikTok, and like here he talks about cheat codes. And so I think that's kind of cool, like the Matrix allusions or references that I think add some fun to like these really dense and like really dark and real and raw topics. So I think that's why I had this one highlighted. And talking about wordplay, you know, halfway down the page, your Holmes is an extraterrestrial that we left behind and now he's illegal. A gag rule in his mouth and we can counsel him. But the council is always in favor of the council. We can also cancel him. But the council is also in favor of that. So just again, like this play on words with, you know, Holmes and like that particularity in language of the border. But also bringing like this alien, this sci-fi, this simulator aspect to it, I thought was kind of fun. And he does this a lot more in this section. He does like assimilate, no simulate, counsel, no cancel, right? So I think, again, and I always tell my students this, you know, when we're reading poetry, you have to read it out loud. I know, like, if you're reading in a public space or something, it's weird, right? But try to find a space where you can do this and read it aloud and judge the effect of sound and rhythm, because there's so much that you can miss if you're just reading the poetry inside your head. And this book is just like the perfect example of that, where you have to do it. And I know, Rich, you were talking about the audio book, the audio version last time. So just again, a reminder.
Yeah, if you have Spotify Premium, that's available for free, just as a heads up. But yeah, it's kind of, and I recommend it to my students, like if you can, like listen to the audiobook and read along at the same time. That way, so like sometimes for me it's hard to focus, so it's nice to like listen to it and read along at the same time. It just double experience. Plus, in the audiobook, you get both versions read as well, the English and the Spanish back to back.
Yeah.
Did anyone have anything before 110?
No, not me.
Did you all feel like these passages, the longer ones, the more like prose sections, disrupted the poetry in a way, or do you think like it flowed well with the rest of the collection? I think they were easier to read.
Yeah, I don't really think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel like it disrupted the flow.
For this one, and the border simulator is this language a desert also. In the beginning, I did like again, kind of thinking about the play on words, where it says at the bottom, "Dear Crosser, your digital footprint is more of a digital stain on the border simulator. Customs will always try and wipe you clean. Are you sure you're sure which customs I'm talking about? Sometimes I'm not even, because customs words were camouflaged to ensnare us and entrap there's life." So, playing around with the idea of the digital footprint, and because it is a simulator, I mean, it kind of becomes almost like a analog footprint. And then, of course, the customs becomes lowercase customs here. So there's already a lot there, right? And this is just a few lines from this longer kind of prose and poem piece.
Yeah, I think 112 has some pretty interesting prose there on just the map, the border being lost, and then I like this idea of, instead of an unreliable narrator, it's an unreliable translator. And I guess we all are, right? Unreliable translator of customs. And this idea of knowing the genre of detainment, which I think is this whole book, right? Talking about how language is used to confuse and gets people lost, unreliable translation. I know we talk a lot about the wordplay, but it's almost like you're navigating the intricacies of language, which sometimes it's hard if you're a crosser. So I thought the top of that page was pretty great and relevant.
There's also a lot here in this piece about the commodification, how it is that the migrants, become expendable, and there's also the labor that they make that is, of course, commodified. The line here on 116 about if you refuse to do arts and crafts for customs, then we make you sell you. These crossers, they're selling their teeth, they're selling their kidney, they're selling their plasma, they're selling their hair, and all this gets across into simulation. So there's a lot there that, I had mentioned the connection to Devil's Highway with Luis Alberto Rea, but also like the things they carried about kind of what these things represent, right? And there's so much that has been written about too by different scholars about the things that they find in the desert, besides Luis Rea, but rosaries and just different things that they bring with them, and what that means to them. But also how they try to make do by, even before they get here, just selling something of theirs that can actually help pay for the journey, right? Help pay for the coyote. So I think he's also exploring that too, and he has been even before this one, of course.
Yeah, I had that part highlighted too, and I just wrote on the side sacrifice, because it really just shows like how much is sacrificed for crossing or for that opportunity to even cross. And that last line too, crossers are also selling their time, but that never grows back or crosses. So again, like that wordplay of like crossing, but also like you said, like the rosaries could be part of that. I think this is where he starts talking a lot more about maps too.
Yeah.
And language and the correlation between the two. I don't know if you all wanted to mention what we were talking about pre-show.
Yeah.
Or is that later?
Or is that was that one of the lines that made you think of the maps, or is it later on?
There is a reference here to maps, but for mine there was one later on. But yeah, we were talking about in the pre-show that there's an allusion here, and I was trying to figure out what it was, but you helped me figure out it was Borges who gave us the idea of like a map that is so large that can be to scale to the actual land that it represents. And just philosophically, that's interesting, but also in terms of the surreal and the the nature of this simulator, that's interesting too, because in a way the border simulator is a kind of map, a digital map of the actual land. So later on, he does get into it a little more, but I can't. It goes back to how like there's different layers to reading these poems, and again, this is what makes it, like cutting through the woods or the jungle with a machete, right? Because you do struggle a bit in terms of wrapping your head around some of these ideas. And also, like, if you weren't familiar with that, you might miss out on that too.
My next one is until 128. Yeah. So no one has anything before
No.
128? Okay, I was just waiting. You guys were checking. Um, I like on 128 you have the piece customs are waiting for me with their lassos and zip ties, and at the end of the page, bleeding into the next, I really like this thing. It reminds me of like Nietzsche a little bit, and the void, staring into the void. But just again, kind of touching on how the border is made. It's including the fence, right? And I just thought it was a surreal description here of the fence, right? The fence's eyes are located in its weaves, and I can feel its gaze. Yes, the fence looks at me just as I look at the fence. When you look at each other long enough, you start to influence each other's behavior, and the fence has seen me work for years at the border. The fence has seen me building it, the fence. Just like that kind of idea there. Just, I don't know, almost like a creepy vibe. I mean, it's talking about the fence having eyes and looking at you. It's just, maybe it also touches on the surveillance, and the technology of surveillance on the border. In this way that it did remind me of Nietzsche. You stare at the business, stares back at you, kind of thing.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it as like the surveillance part, which is the obvious like literal thing, but more of like, yeah, it's this presence, like it has that power, it holds that power to look back at you.
Yeah.
This ominous thing.
I'm noticing the fence is a recurring image in a lot of these poems that follow.
The fence. We didn't really talk a whole lot about themes, right? I guess in the previous episode we said we would just talk about as we come across them. So the fence is prominent. You also mentioned how murals start to make more presence in the second
Yeah.
part. I think that's kind of interesting the way he talks about murals. There's so much. Speaking of going through with the machete, that's how I feel going through these lines and like trying to like come up with something tangible for each piece or each page.
I think also, are these some of the first poems where he's directly referencing Juarez, as opposed to in the other ones where he was talking about El Paso? To me, it seems like here in this section, he's directly referencing Juarez now. But maybe I missed it in the previous part one, but that's another thing that I'm noticing.
Yeah.
There's a Smith's reference on 146. Did you catch that one, Vanessa?
I did not.
Well, it's different. Just heaven knows I'm commiserable now. Instead of heaven knows I'm miserable now. That's a little one.
Yeah, in 146, there's some more. I like how he does ew with ews. As a kind of, again, reading out loud, it's that playfulness with the language. Even the NAFTA after party, like NAFTA after. A lot of, yeah, he starts going with a lot more with some music stuff we had kind of mentioned, right? At the drive-in reference, right? I think just with the guy from At the Drive-In. Again, you
in
reference
Spanish con el tipo de at the drive.
yeah, con el tipo. Yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't even notice that. I did like that one. Can you caption this crosser? I put down the captured by my captions. This idea of a word lasso and a snare of a sentence, because he brings up just like the nature of language a lot too, and all throughout these pages. Again, the after, we talked about the after. Here you got the afterlife, because I just came from the after.
Yeah.
Man, I just felt like I just said a whole lot of nonsense.
Well, that's what it feels like reading some of these.
Yeah.
You know, because of the repetition and a lot of the wordplay.
You said 46. 56 was your next one?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
Because of the
yeah.
Terminator. I'm just kidding.
You know, I had to.
Yeah.
But also the kind of what you just said right literally like right now, he says, quit using the border for your writing, right? But no, I'm using the language of the users of the border for my language cuffs. They fit so well on my frame. And I feel like I'm having deja vu because didn't we have a similar line in part 1 about like him being cuffed and like using the language in that way? Or is it? Did we?
Maybe.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah.
Because it does have that nature, the repetition throughout.
But so part of it was that for me in this poem, kind of us mentioning, well, he's kind of repeating a lot of images, right? Well, he's kind of, has that made a comment here. And then, of course, what you mentioned, Rain, about the Terminator illusion. And again, referencing this kind of sci-fi world. And, the speaker even says, this is, I don't know if this customs. Nights I spent with the Terminator, I mean I. So kind of, again, referencing the... how much is this, or are they just copies and clones and machines, right? There's again a lot of reference here to like the Primitivo is making other copies of Primitivo.
I thought one of those eyes was a 1 for Terminator 1.
Oh yeah.
But it also makes sense the other way.
No, yeah, I think you're right.
But which one is it?
Right.
Tell us, Richie, when you listen
That's
to
a
this.
great one. Yeah. And then at the end of that piece, you have another like very, very repetitive image is the bedazzled jeans, right?
Vanessa's favorite. You can't see, but
She
Vanessa's
wore 'em.
wearing some.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It sparkled as she came into the
Sparkle, sparkle.
Speaking of her, that's do you have that one? So I love this one. I don't know. You have that Popeye reference. I am what I am, but of course, right away we thought of Invisible Man. I wrote that one. This is one of my favorite cameos, I guess, or illusions. Yeah, because Invisible Man, it's talks a lot about just identity and how we choose to identify ourselves, and I think that's such a pivotal point in that novel where he accepts sweet potatoes, right, as his identity, Southern food, right? So that's a big one that we talk about all the time, is like food and identity. And here, of course, Gabriel is saying, but on the border it's camote. And so I just thought he kind of is clever using Ellison's wordplay here, like from Invisible Man, and I just it's one of those like little joyful things to get there. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that was one of my favorites too, of course. And I mean, I love how he's giving everything a border twist, using that wordplay, using different connections between the border and like other things outside of it.
I wanted to ask you guys about, because I did allude to it earlier, but we didn't really explore it. I mentioned murals, right? That was brought up, and the way he talks about murals. So on 162, um, it's not necessarily like I don't know if it's a positive one, right? The images of these migrants at the border is public access. They are stock images, and that is why we make you, Primitivo, paint murals of the rural crossers. The same reason classical music is used in movies. The crossers, like the classical piece by Bach, are open domain, and they're open for your documentary or mural depicting the border. Kind of like maybe pointing to like the stereotype of it, plus like almost what would you say? I was talking to a local muralist and artist, and he wasn't a big fan of like this idea too of like flattened images like border crossers and making it like the mural. But there's a little bit of political part behind it, like who's sponsoring like the murals and stuff. But I don't know if that's what he's trying to. I don't know if that's what he's trying to get there. That's how I felt by the reference to like stock images.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up the issue here of consent, and I think it's interesting how like they're covering their face and with their phone, and yeah, I think in terms of the ethics of the border, it's important to like. There's a line I think that artists should draw, and I think from what I understand, I mean they are aware of that. But yeah, I think especially like if it's photography, and I think people in general do that, right? Like they'll block off if it's kids, like they'll block off their face. But yeah, this is an interesting one.
I like the title of that one too. Just watch out for voices that don't match their face,
Ooh, yeah.
Just like who's speaking for these people. A lot of times because of like where they're viewed, whether it be a photograph or a news story, like it's going to be a different voice, a different depiction of the crosser. But then it's also interesting to see the mural because the murals are usually like they're supposed to elevate the subject. So yeah, I think it's just conflicting either way you look at it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it kind of continues with that. I like that title, the poem on 164, about taking his voice. We took Primitivo's voice with a cassette recorder. I like that too. We happy to guide him into our vernacular hut, asking him to sum up the border in one phrase. Because across the border it exists, right? A continual reply all effect. I think that's the border simulator in action again, right? Oof. That's almost like the horror reference too of like bulges, extra organs, and layers of artificial skin. Just this monstrous thing.
Yeah, he was talking about skin suits earlier too.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about those, I don't think, but
It comes up quite a few times too here in the
Yeah.
second part.
I also like that line that you read, Richie, because across the border it exists. And I guess like we were talking a little bit about maps, and if you look at maps, it's not really like defined. Like yes, you see like the lines of the countries and everything, but like living here, we actually see it and we cross it, and so it's like a different feeling than I think a lot of people have like that live further up north or like they don't see the border. And so they talk about it, but they don't have like a firsthand experience of like what it's actually like.
yeah, there's like a sign, "Welcome to New Mexico" or whatever, but
Yeah.
it's just like something you
Yeah.
cross and that's it. But Jorge crossed the actual border this morning.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about that, Jorge.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it goes back to the dangerous rhetoric that we see because of that people see an image of like migrants crossing, and like the media, of course, blows it up and makes it seem like, you know, there's an invasion. And of course, we have unfortunately been seeing the consequences of that kind of thinking, the bigoted thinking, you know, with the Walmart massacre. But yeah, I mean, the limitations of mapping, right, is something to think about with mapping, and even with like you know, photos and video, right, that you only see a snapshot of the thing, but you're not in the thing itself. And I think maybe this is all something that he's trying to get to with the simulator, is like ultimately this is all just pretend. This isn't reality, but the reality that it made is like maybe it's constructed out of those memes, right, that just make it nonsensical, make it horrific, you know. Because one thing I was thinking is like I would have liked to have seen, and maybe this will be a question for him, is like, well, what would a world be without borders? Like, how can we imagine that world? And I think you know, poetry is a tool that can help us imagine that. So that would have been something I would have liked to see, just to kind of change it up. But then again, I mean, maybe this is like part of the issue of like being a simulator, is like it can only produce what it's given from customs, from like, you know, the powers that be.
Yeah, if there isn't a border, then the crossers wouldn't exist, or like, you know, like
Yeah.
to have a border means to have crossers, means to have all the different things that come with that. Yeah, so I think a lot of it does have to do with just the simulator aspect of it being manufactured, which is a really interesting way of viewing it.
Because historically, right? I mean, there wasn't a border. Like this was all part of Mexico, and so you know, we're right by the chamizal, and like even with the chamizal, like there was a big dispute about who's gonna get it. So they ended up cutting it in a way. But yeah, I mean, and ultimately, even before Mexico, right? I mean, it's like indigenous land. And I always feel a little weird, like us reading those land acknowledgments, because ultimately, like, yeah, I mean, it's nice to recognize it, but like, it's not, what do they call it? A speech act, right? Like, I do when you get married, it doesn't really do anything. So, yeah, a lot of issues with like, you know, border ideology.
So I mean, kind of adding to making the border exist. The next one on 166, I think. I don't want to go too in depth in it, right? But even the title, "Customs resurrected you, pretty me," because they need more of you to make the border exist. And I think it goes into a nice little part there talking about X, and I think X here becomes an interesting symbol because he's always talking about graphs and lines and symbols here. But of course, X is also the X in Juarez, right? X marks the spot. X, you know, representing this. The Mylar blank Gex, like blanket, you know, like it means danger, means meet the spot, you know, where the treasure is buried. All these different like meanings of it, and really, you have the reference to bedazzled jeans again, but of course, Primi, his double, right? The many copies of Primi is here too, right? You're not there, but your double is. You're not there, and you never were. I think that's a continuation of what we were just talking about.
And yeah, this one takes us to the next section, which is, you know, the customs remakes the map of the border.
That's one of my favorite lines in the whole piece. You spend your whole life with mazes as your jailer. Like, I mean, we just finished talking about maps, right?
Did anyone have on 172 here some more advice?
Go ahead.
This one was just like, I don't know, kind of like gut wrenching. I didn't really care too much for it because when reading it, it just kind of reminded me of like the previous poems of like assimilating and just being passive and like here's what customs expects of you and here's how to best achieve your purpose. But it almost kind of like, I don't know. I mean, there's actual lines where like, do not resist arrest, and like, if a fight breaks out in a bar, leave, for in the confusion you could be arrested even though you did nothing. So it's like just the reality of staying in the shadows and of you know, better to be detained than to be lost ideas because of like where your place is for the crossers. So yeah, I mean, it's a good poem. It's just one of those that like just makes you reflect, or at least made me reflect a little more on that reality. Refuse to make a declaration or sign documents. Blur the distinction between crossers. So yeah, just again like bringing awareness to here's how to survive. Try not to make any noise, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that came up a lot, right? With a lot of like just some of the laws around the country, like in Arizona and here, where immigrants would want to avoid any kind of like, even if they were the victims, right? Because they wanted to avoid getting in that altogether for the fear of what might happen.
And unfortunately, that might become even more true with SB4 if on appeal it ends up being the law of the land. Yeah, so definitely hits. This one hits hard because of all those things that we're seeing now, that we've seen before as well.
Well, even the workers that were hit on the bridge over in that bridge that just got hit by that cargo ship, that were like refusing medical help because probably they didn't have insurance because they were immigrants. And so it's kind of like, just like, again, like that fear of, you know, putting their names out there or having the spotlight on them.
So this is you know, that map poem. Well, one of them. All your styles look like other crossers' styles on 188, and it says, "This fabrica sells maps of cities and ID cards onto mylar blankets. Unfortunate maps throughout the necessary frontier. Okay, the map creates the land instead of the other way around. If you're ever feeling down, snicker because you couldn't pass. Just flip the map so it looks like you're on top." So once again, we get the surreal imagery from Borges, where the map becomes the land. The map is the land instead of the land being mapped. And you also get this kind of like MC Escher type image where like you can flip it and then you're on top now. You know, both literally and figuratively. So yeah, I like this one because of that. And it begins with you know, that reference again to the sisterhood of the traveling pants as well. And of course, the pants here are bedazzled, right? So,
But it's real women have traveling pants. And like that first part, real women, reminded me of Real Women Have Curves.
yeah.
The America Ferrera movie. So maybe it's a play on both.
Because yeah, in that one they're working right in the fabrica. Yeah.
I was looking to see what bedazzled pants is in Spanish. And it's just pantalones con pedrería. So I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. I thought it was going to be cooler.
I didn't have any more obvious ones after that. You know, it just kind of
Yeah.
like the wrap up. It's the wrapping up, right? As a reminder.
Yeah. I just had the last lines at the end on 208. This is you've always been a border simulator. when you speak of the border simulator, you're really speaking about the X, where the two worlds meet. So once again, the mapping and Laikis and the border.
I just want to talk about one last poem. You Whom They Border on page 190. Towards the bottom of the page, it says, that's the number of remains found in the year, not the deaths. And it just like made me really think about, like, yes, people are like found, but there's a lot of people who aren't found and aren't heard from on this journey as they try to make it to the border and over the border. And yeah, just like keeping that in mind, that a lot of lives are lost like along the way.
Yeah, that's really true, because like the remain count is definitely different from the death count, right?
Yeah.
Even just like thinking about everything in Gaza right now, like all the deaths that have been
Yeah.
told to us, but it's like so much of that infrastructure is just gone that there's no way, like years from now, we might not even know what the actual number is.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And it does go back to how migration scholars, they do very important work, but there's also the risk of like losing, because of so many statistics and numbers of like how many cross. And of course, CBP also keeps track of this data, but you miss losing out on the humanity of the people who cross, and like, their families, that are detained. That one is referencing also the catch and release that people have criticized because it makes it sound, well, I mean, they're just kind of out there in the world, but I mean, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, I mean, there, and what you mentioned, right, Raina, about the Palestine and the genocide there, that I think it really shows the importance of social media, of the digital world, because we wouldn't be getting this from like the traditional news of newspapers, that can be very, very biased and not even there in some cases, right? Because like it's just dangerous for them.
So I do like that, like a lot of this is from custom side, but a lot of it is also from the crosser side. So we see most of it being the crosser, and in this particular poem, even like the conflating of the two borders and how living on the border, that could happen to us too, where we're like, oh, I mean Juarez. Oh, no, I mean El Paso. Or, oh, yeah, I forgot that's on this side or the other side. Like my sister, she laughs because I always make fun of her because she thought the X was on this side for the longest time. I'm like, why would it be on this side?
Yeah.
But, like that confusion or that conflating of the two, especially when we're right on the line, that imaginary line, where, it's just, it's our part of our reality, but in this case, part of the simulator. So, or maybe it's part of our simulator too.
Right.
I don't know. So why do we think like it ended there? I like that it ended with that, where the two worlds meet.
X marks the spot.
Very Ansel Dewin finish there.
Yeah. So we mentioned the possibility of eventually doing an interview with Gabriel next time he's in town. So I think that'd be pretty cool. We
Hopefully soon, because it's so much that I hope I don't like,
we'll have to
forget.
reread it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on the border simulator? Maybe like how it fits with other border narratives?
Definitely a lot more experimental than other ones. A lot more futuristic and But I mean, yeah, this isn't gonna be the final word because I still want to talk to Gabriel about this. So, have a little two-way conversation where it's not just him giving us the answers, but also us kind of chiming in with like how we as readers interpreted it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think that's the other thing then. So, as you guys listen to these episodes, as you pick up your copy or listen to it, if you have any questions that you would like to know, maybe we have enough time in between episodes where we can definitely make a note to ask when we do have a chance to talk to him. You leave a
yeah,
comment on
Yeah.
Spotify or on our social media.
I'll add it to
Send us a DM.
yeah, I'll add it to the Spotify poll question you can have there.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Literally Literary, recorded at Power at the Pass and brought to you by Border Census. This episode, we continued our discussion on The Border Simulator by Gabriel Dozal. If you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Join us on our next episode and follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep.